Okay, so I think we have a good one today. It's going to be built off of the last topic, which we talked about basically how I'm building things in an argumentative structure, but then I also recognize that there's this ecosystem of reality that it has to match, and how you take your argument and your premises and all of these different things, and you have to make sure that they work with your argument that you make when you're trying to discuss a particular viewpoint about the nature of reality. And so your argument, basically, you need a foundation that enables you to make your next logical steps that in order to support your conclusion. And that's the argument structure. And then there's the reality structure, which is, does my premise match reality, and can I work my way from my premise to reality? And then also, can I deconstruct reality back to my premise? And I think that this two-way street nature is especially important because we're restricted by the way that time works. So, for example, archaeological history, so like the fossil record, we don't have any immediate evidence for a lot of that data. So what you have to permit is people to evaluate the data in the present time as it currently exists and then infer backwards. So we need this to be sort of a two-way street where we allow our premise to build up to reality, and then we should hold ourselves to deconstructing the reality and see if we can work our way back to the premise. I gave some examples last time about why that's important, and today we're going to get into a really specific one. Well, not a really specific one. It's in general pretty generic, but I just want to show the general concept with something that's very, very important. So we're actually going to chime back into the second video because I originally said, hey, what you do with the reality that we discovered that the universe had a beginning determines a ton of stuff, and we're going to talk about that today. So I want to start with something, and it's pretty straightforward, but I'm just going to doodle something. It's not going to be professional or anything. Just going to doodle something pretty simple. So let's say that there's an infinite number of universes, right? So U equals universe that does exist. Okay? Oops. Does exist, right? That's what U means. It's a universe that exists. That does exist. Okay, so infinite is however many you can conceptualize. There's an infinite number beyond that. Anything that you can't conceptualize, there's an infinite number beyond that. So basically, infinite is literally, it's straightforward to say. It's very difficult to conceptualize when you start applying it to things in reality, because reality doesn't really work in infinites. So while you can sort of flirt with the concept and touch it, you can't really ever realize it in the fullest sense. But so let's just use infinity to the best of our ability. Let's try to wrestle with this concept. So U is a universe that does exist. The general proposition that I have been hearing is that there's an infinite number of universes potentially, and when you have infinite, it sort of grants this mathematical result of inevitability. So you have universe 1, right? That means that let's call this universe 1. That means that this universe for sure does exist, and then we have a comma, we have universe 2, and it goes all the way to universe infinity, right? So universe 1 exists, universe 2 exists, universe infinity exists. So you just basically keep filling in those dots infinitely into the direction. We're just giving them artificial labels. So there would just be a never-ending list of universes that for sure do exist, right? So the catch with this, right, is that we found out that the universe had a beginning. So we know that space, time, matter all came into existence. They're all correlative with energy. So there was an influx of energy, space, time, and matter at the creation of the universe. So that would be called the material. That would be the natural. So if you accept, as we talked about in one of the previous videos, if you accept that the universe had a beginning, you either accept that it had a cause. Remember, we're not making a claim about what kind of cause could be. It could, let's just say we're not saying it can't be material, but it can be efficient or otherwise. So if you accept that there is a cause, then it's about what kind of cause. And then if you don't, you would have to accept inexplicability, which we discussed, and we basically said if the universe doesn't have a cause, that means that it came into existence inexplicably, and then you have to wonder why inexplicable creations don't constantly happen. Why don't horses constantly get generated? Why don't stars constantly pop up in the middle of the earth, etc., etc.? Because it's inexplicable. If space, time, matter, and energy can pop into existence inexplicably, as did the universe, why is nothing so why is it so why does it make such a distinction? Why is it so partial to universes? Why don't all kinds of things just pop into existence? Why is it so specific with the kinds of things it lets itself generate randomly? So that's the general concept, right? Like, you either accept that there's a cause, and then it's what kind of cause. That was what we would try to explain, or you would basically have to accept that the universe came into being without a cause, which would make it inexplicable. So that's the general concept that we're functioning off of. So if space, time, and matter came into being, then the cause can't be material, because by definition it's non-material. Matter came into existence from nothing, so you have a non-material cause. So then what you end up with is, by every definition that's conceivable, if the cause is not space, time, and matter, which is what makes up the natural world, you would end up with something that is supernatural or extra natural, something that is beyond natural. So what I'm trying to discuss, what I'm building to is, I don't see a distinction between this and universe 1 exists and that cause is God, right? What's the difference between claiming supernatural cause and calling it God versus supernatural cause and calling it something that can't be defined because it doesn't exist in the natural world? I don't see any solid argument for that. Like, I don't see the distinction. So I don't think this is any less crazy than this, and truthfully vice versa. It's not about whether or not it's crazy or possible. It's about, does the foundation, and this is why we're doing it this way, does it give enough foundational context to then make sense of reality? That's where my hang-up is. It's not in, is it possible? It's, does reality then work its way back to that in a way that's coherent? And I don't think that's true. So let's start with this. So we're going to get rid of this, because this isn't really important. The top part is, but this particular portion is not. Right? So we're going to talk about this. I wrote a couple of little just simple notes. If there are infinite universes, there are infinite universes that are exactly like this one. There's infinite of this universe, because the same conditions, theoretically, there's no reason that these exact same conditions and these exact same results wouldn't have happened an infinite number of times. Because you can call this universe 1, right? But there's an infinite number of possible iterations that could happen, which means that this one by definition of infinite would at some point happen again an infinite number of times, because that's how infinite works. So these same conditions would be inevitable. to occur more than once or an infinite number of times. So there's me sitting here in this room giving this exact same thing an infinite number of times. So there's an infinite number of possible variations. There's infinite of any that could, might, do, or don't, and won't exist. So what I mean by that is even where, let's call a universe, doesn't start, but it like tries to kick off or whatever, and then it doesn't have the right conditions to do anything, it would fail. There would be an infinite number of failed universes. There would be an infinite number of quote-unquote successful universes, unraveling universes, etc. So there'd be infinite non-starters and infinite of this one, and etc., etc. So the catch becomes, this opens up the possibility that there are universes that are absolutely in no way anything like our own, even at any fundamental level. So no space, no time, no matter, no energy, no planets, nothing even resembling those things. I believe that that would be a logical condition of an infinite number of possible universes, or an infinite number of possibilities in general. And I'm going to explain why I think that's the case. So this conclusion becomes a necessary inevitability, right? If there's an infinite number of variations, then there's an infinite number of variables that we do and don't know about, variables that we do and don't understand, variables that we have evidence for, and variables that we don't have evidence for. It becomes an inevitability. You have to somehow work your way towards this, although it's unjustifiable. And what I mean by that is, this universe is limited to the certain types of natural and material causes and natural and material data that we have access to because of the nature of this universe. So we could never justify that there's an infinite number of inevitable universes that have nothing like this one, nothing to do with this one. But we could never provide evidence for those because they, by the very nature, don't resemble anything like our universe. So you could never provide evidence that is likely or possible or anything. It's just sort of implicit in the possibility of infinite variation. So while the assertion that it's possible, so that there could be a counterpoint, and what I'm going to describe is maybe an argument somebody would try to make and say, it's possible that this kind of universe, so space, time, material, energy, right, that's the only possible like style, so to speak. So it's possible, right? The logical conclusion. So I'm not saying it's a logical impossibility. I can conceive of it, and it doesn't seem to refute itself. But the question becomes, why, right? So the logical conclusion, when assuming infinite possibilities, why would you put this discriminatory rule upon what infinite can imply, right? And so it just seems the logical conclusion when assuming an infinite number of possibilities must be to assume there is no reason to deny the inevitability of all nonsensical variants, right? So non-provable ones. You would basically have to put an arbitrary discriminatory mechanism or an arbitrary restrictor on the inevitability, or not the inevitability, the infinity mechanism, in order to support this explanatory possibility, right? So what I mean by that is, there's nothing that forces an infinite universe generating machine to only generate this kind of universe, right? Because the whole argument that makes this universe inevitable is that there's an infinite number of possible universes that make this one inevitable. So it's another one of those cake and eat it too things. You don't get the benefit of an infinite number of possibilities that makes this one inevitable without also having the downside of an infinite number of nonsensical, non-provable variants. And I'm not saying you can't make the argument. I can say anything that I want to, but that doesn't make it justifiable. And it seems pretty arbitrary to try to say that the universe generating mechanism or law or whatever, for some reason, is bound by this universe's configuration. It doesn't make any sense. There's no evidence. So, like, the last piece of notes that I wrote, I said, so for example, you could say infinity of this discriminatory kind is still infinite, right? So that would be the argument. You would say there's an infinite number of universes that do resemble this in some way, but there's an infinite number of tweaks, an infinite number of duplication, an infinite number of tweaks. And you could say that that's still infinite, which is true. I acknowledge that. That's why I'm not saying it's not logical. It's simply unjustifiable. Okay, that's true that it's still infinite, but infinity doesn't, the concept of infinity itself doesn't require discrimination. It's not a required component of discrimination to be infinity. In fact, it almost inherently excludes discrimination. The evidence for a second variation of a universe with even the slightest resemblance to this one, while easy to conceptualize, right? So, like, we can picture a universe that's similar to this one but has slight little tweaks. You know, maybe there's no life on any planet and everything's just kind of, it's really just spinning into a black hole. That would be a slight variance to this universe. It's easy to conceptualize those things, but the evidence for that kind of universe is identical to the evidence that we have for infinite nonsensical variations, right? Which is zero. There's no evidence that another universe like that exists, and there's no evidence that a universe that's nothing like this exists. So the evidence for it is nothing. There's zero evidence in either direction for either one of those concepts. So you would have to have evidence that there's more than one like this to support it in any evidential way. Otherwise, you're basically just saying, because this universe is the way it is, even though our argument is that the nature of infinite variation makes this inevitable, there's a limit on that variation based off of what we know about this universe. And that is a forced non sequitur assertion. There's no reason for that to have to be put back upon that mechanism, so to speak. So that's the general concept. That's kind of the going to support the framework that we move forward from. So in a universe generating mechanism, right, where infinite possibilities exist, the universe sort of follows rules. So all of these universes, right, they all follow some set of rules. And the outcomes are inevitable. They're simply the unraveling of the rules. So if life forms, it was inevitable to form. The life forms that do form were inevitable to form because of the conditions that existed at the beginning when it was created. If no life forms form, it was inevitable because of the conditions that when it was created, or not created, but like when it came into being. I keep using the word created. I don't mean it like that. When it came into being, right? So a lot of people believe in determinism, which, you know, is pretty common. But I want to get into this particular concept, right? So, and this is really the argument that we're getting into. So that other thing was just kind of like a preface. It was just to set it up. In a universe where there are infinite number of possibilities, the fact that we live in this one is arbitrary. Now, I don't mean arbitrary in the sense that we're not bound by this version of it, but when you intellectually trace yourself back and try to root yourself in this appeal, this other appeal, the universe generating thing that determines the rules of this universe, it is rooted in infinite variation of all types of morality, all types of life form, all types of evolutionary results. So for example, if you want to make the argument that morality evolved as an evolutionary requirement in order to sustain life in this particular universe, there's an infinite number of universes where life evolved with an inverted sense of morality, with no sense of morality, with where life just consumed itself inevitably and eternally, and then it's all life ceased. There's an infinite number of universes where all of those things happen. And when you root yourself in that, it makes any form of unraveling, any form of anything, and I'm not just talking about morality, I'm just using morality because I think it's a good framework to really show some of the inconsistencies in any worldview, not even just this particular one. In any worldview, morality is a great place to expose those kinds of things, potentially. Which is, I mean, that's my goal. My goal is to try to see if consistency works. So anything that you think is objective is rooted in arbitrary, random inevitability, right? So any appeal you want to make to anything objective is thwarted. It has no basis in reality. And so we're going to go back over to our definition before we come back to this little drawing board. So I brought up this objective. So it's not dependent on the mind for existence. It is actual, a matter of objective fact. Here's another of a person or their judgment, not influenced by personal feelings or opinions in considering and representing facts. So in philosophy, which is really what we're talking about, the concept of truth independent from individual subjectivity. Right. So, in a universe generating machine, you could say the objective reality of this universe is that species, show self-sacrifice towards one another inside of their own species, and some don't. But we're talking about working your way back to the appeal. So you would basically just have to say it's objective here, but it's not really objective in the scheme of ultimate reality. And I'm using the word ultimate reality because it is real. The other things are real. We just don't have access to them. And the fact that we can even conceptualize that, it shows that at least it's a possibility, even if it's not a fact. It's an absolute possibility that those things would, in fact, be truly real and as real as we are. We can't access them, but that doesn't make them any less real. So your objectivity gets rooted in something that's arbitrary. Even if it's objective, relative here, it's still relative, right? Because it's objective, but only relative to this version, which still makes objectivity relative, which is just basically saying that it's subjective. It doesn't have anything to appeal to that's definitive and set. Okay, so we went over the definition. Now we'll go back to the drawing board and show what I'm really trying to get at, right? So the topic of this is actually going to end up being divine versus material or natural revelation. And I'm sure that a lot of people probably won't like that, but I think that it's really an accurate representation of the truth of the logical consistency of these two perspectives. You either believe in divine revelation, or you believe in natural and material revelation. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. Divine revelation is very simple. An objective God exists, an objective God communicates, an objective God reveals the truth. That would be divine revelation. Now, an individual can experience that. It could be perpetuated through things like in the universe. There could be evidences or examples of that kind of revelation existing. Scripture is typically one of the most recognized and most universally accepted forms of perceived divine revelation. So that would be really what divine revelation is. It's something that is not inherently or could not really inherently be extracted from reality. It's sort of an infusion, an injection of objectivity or of reality, an exposure of reality or an injection of reality into the world. That would be divine revelation. It would be from source into reality, and that would be divine. It could be to an individual, a group, or whatever. So a lot of people think that revelation is one of the most laughable concepts. They look to it and view it as one of the most easily refutable forms of evidence for any particular religious worldview. And they'll say a lot of people believe that experience isn't evidence. So I'm not going to debate the merit of that explicitly, although it will probably come into play at some point. What I want to show now is if you root yourself in this inevitability construct, I want to talk about what actually ends up happening, right? So let's say, for example, that this general premise is true, right? Everything follows some set of rules. The outcomes are inevitable. So as an individual, a lot of materialists and naturalists believe that there is no such thing as free will, and that it's an illusion, and that you are deterministic to the very, very most foundational level. Meaning that they believe that because the universe has physical laws, everything that they do, think, believe, act on, anything like that, is determined. And if you remember, I said that I was going to do my best to argue those two types of extremes because handling every inconsistent variation is impossible. I believe, as I have personally heard from the vast majority of people that I think are the best speakers and the best minds of this particular worldview, most of them affirm that effectively free will, or the ability to truly make free decisions, is an illusion. So for example, I think it was Stephen Hawking basically said that I don't know what I'm going to do, so it might as well not be determined. I'm paraphrasing, that's not exactly what he said, but it's something very similar to that. He basically said, I can't know that I don't have free will, so I might as well have it, which is another one of those cake and eat it too kind of things. It's like, okay, you believe you don't have free will. You believe there's evidence you don't have free will, which is why you believe you don't have free will. But because you can't know you don't have free will, you might as well have free will. That to me is one of the worst arguments you could ever put forth. It's not compelling. And while it like rolls off the tongue and sounds kind of punchy, it's just bankrupt. It's philosophically bankrupt. So, and I don't mean necessarily logically impossible. It's not what I'm trying to say. I'm saying that it's a bad argument because it seems philosophically bankrupt. Like the premise doesn't seem to inform the conclusion in any way. So let's discuss this now. So let's talk about determinism, because like I said, that I believe is the most consistent worldview, where you believe that the universe sort of just got like vomited out by the rules of the rules of the universe, right? Like the laws of the universe made the universe come into being, and we're just sort of playing it out. In determinism, everything in the universe is determined, right? So if your thoughts are in the universe, if the things you study are in the universe, if your actions are in the universe, if you are in the universe, everything about you is determined. Your hair color, your eyesight, the things you think, the people you end up sleeping with, or the people you end up loving, or whatever, it's all determined. What this does is it's really interesting, especially when it comes to rationality. So rationality, let's pull up a definition. I want to make sure that I do this justice. So rationality definition. So the quality of being based on or in accordance with reason or logic, the quality of being able to think sensibly or logically, the quality of being endowed with the capacity to reason. So reason definition. The power of the mind to think, understand, and form judgments based by a process of logic. And then we'll do one more, and we'll just hit that judgment definition, just to kind of tie things together as best as possible. The ability to make considered decisions or come to sensible conclusions. So all of these, in some capacity or another, they talk about an ability and considered decisions or come to sensible conclusions. So what I want to show, or what we're going to talk about, is that specific concept when paired with determinism. So determinism means that everything is determined. Everything about you, your thoughts, likes, dislikes, the actions you're going to take, they're all determined. In a world where everything is determined, this means what you think and your ability to think are determined. Right? What you think, your ability to think, your ability to make sound judgments, sensible conclusions, make considered decisions where you weigh something, evidence or whatever, or argument, or the compelling nature of something, and you weigh its opposite, and you pick one. It's determined. What you will do with all of the types of decisions or the things that you believe or think or whatever, you don't actually have the ability to select one or the other outside of the nature of what you can or cannot, would or would not do. Now, this is really interesting, but I'm not saying that objectivity doesn't work in this world. It is wholly possible that there is still an objective truth, but no one can rationally come to the conclusion of what that objectivity is, because no one is capable of picking between what you were going to know and what is true. Because even if you believe what is true, you are always going to believe what is true. And so you can't know that you're right or wrong because you don't have the ability to make a decision in a traditional sense. Like, you couldn't see truth in front of you and deny it, or you couldn't see the falseness in front of you and deny it. You had to accept the truth, or you had to accept the lie, so to speak. So what's super interesting about this to me is that, let's say that you believe in determinism, but you also believe that you have access to rational truth, either rationality or objective truth. Tim, it's really interesting, but this is what I would call material. Oh, I'm going to rewrite this because I'm a slob. This pen doesn't write super well, and I'm already a sloppy writer as it is. This is what I would call material revelation. So to me, no matter how you look at this, your argument would have to be basically either the random laws, not the random, I don't want to use the word random, that the laws of the universe as they unfolded bestowed upon you as a determined characteristic of who you are, that you would be enabled with rationality. And I mean it in the sense that you actually somehow can see the objective reality that underlies everything and can violate your determined nature. So to me, you would basically be saying, through determined laws, it was determined that I would be free. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that's impossible. It definitely rings false, because not everything that's logically possible means it's true or factual. It just means that it is in the realm of possibility. So you have to affirm that. So somehow you have a divine, materialistic, natural revelation that was bestowed upon you by the rules of the universe, that enabled you to see objective reality for what it is, despite your determined nature. Or you can deny that you have the access to rationality, but affirm that what you believe is still true. And that is an even greater appeal to what I would call material or natural revelation. You have to basically believe that despite the fact that your beliefs are determined and you couldn't have ever thought anything other than what you think, and you still think that you have the truth, the objective truth, that means that the natural world bestowed upon you through the luck of the draw the correct opinion about something. And this could only apply to one thing. If it applies to one thing, you still have divine revelation of objectivity. If there's even one single thing you believe that's actually right, it is purely by the luck of the draw and nothing else. You couldn't ever, if you affirm the second, right? So if you affirm that you still hold the truth, but you're not free, but you hold the truth, you could affirm, I guess, that you wouldn't affirm this, but you would have no way of knowing which one of the things you believe is the truth. But it is possible you could have one or many or all of them be true, but it would purely be by luck, and you would have no ability to know which one is or is not true. You couldn't differentiate between any of your determined beliefs. You couldn't actually know that you knew the truth. You just have it, which is, to me, that is a direct appeal to natural or materialistic revelation. And in the former, you basically have to say that you're just blessed by the universe being able to see the truth. And you actually can really legitimately see it. You're free to use rationality to discover it. And the reason that I say this is, let's say, for example, you have me, right? So this is me. I am determined to believe determined to believe, oh my gosh, there we go, believe, negative x, so meaning not x, right? So x is not true. I'm determined to believe that x is not true. And in this world, x is true, right? So x is true, and I'm determined to believe not x. You have you, and you are determined to believe plus x is true, right? So you believe x is true. And just for the sake of consistency, I'm going to try to follow the same pattern here, just so that it's consistent. Negative x is false. Right? So, me, you, not x, x. How do you know who's right? Let's say you had 50,000 other people in here, right? Let's say there's 50,000 you. No, there's 50,000 me. Let's say there's 50,000 me, and there's 10 you. There's 50,000 that were determined to believe not x. There were 10 that were determined to believe x. X is true, so 10 people are right. 50,000 are wrong. You couldn't even have a group of people who statistically analyzed how many people believe X versus how many people believe not X, and then come to some generalized acceptance of what is true, because it would be wrong. It still would be wrong. Even if there's 50 million to 10, 50 million to 1, not even 10, 50 million to 1, it doesn't matter. this value, the number of people that believe a thing or are determined to believe a thing, have no value on the fact that this is what is real. And vice versa. The same thing. It doesn't even change anything. If 50,000 people believe X is true, and it is true, and one person believes not X, you still can't know. You could guess, but everybody's guess would be arbitrary. And if all I have to do is flip the numbers to prove that the solution or the statistical analysis that would be used to try to prove it or justify it is absolutely still incorrect, regardless, the best argument you could make is that taking the general belief of everybody and then making a mathematical distinction between the two and seeing who's on the majority should decide what we believe as a unit. It's just baseless. Like, it doesn't have any impact on it. X is either true or it's not true, and then any of the variables that you might put in that are subjective have no bearing on that. Now, that doesn't mean that the universe has X equals true. You can deny objectivity, right? So a lot of people would deny objectivity. They would say, ultimately, things like morality are subjective. It's just I think one of the classic phrases is a matter of taste. It's just a matter of taste. A lot of people don't like the implication of that. That's fine. You don't have to like the implication of that. I think you are allowed to not like the implication of that as a demonstration of your freedom to do so. Right? I actually believe you have the ability. You are not determined in that sense. And the reason I believe that, beyond the fact that I think that philosophically it just becomes self-evident, is because it's axiomatic. Like, it's self-evident. The fact that I can even say something, and I've said this a bunch already, the fact that I can even say right? So this statement that I keep using, this statement is false. This would be X is not true, right? So this statement will boil down to this statement is false. X is not true is true. X is not true is true. So this statement is not true. And I'm saying it's true. Right? So this is where you get into these bizarre things. Like, then you look at it and you say, so the truth of X is that it's false. So if you believe that it's false, you're wrong. And if you believe that it's true, you're wrong. Right? So this points to an objectivity. So in that instance, if you believed it was true, you'd be wrong. If you believed it was false, you'd be wrong. Because it's a logical contradiction. It can't exist. It doesn't make any sense. That's a demonstration of objectivity, which means that even if the whole world teeters on this, even if the whole world revolves around just this one thing, it proves that objectivity exists. Doesn't mean that objectivity for everything exists. It just proves that it does. The ability to extrapolate that into all sorts of other things, I don't know. That's a debate. The point is that there is a line. It's not about is there a line anymore. It's about where is the line. How far does objectivity reach? And then you get into things like morality and the like. And so what I want to do now is show you this. Let's do it. X equals rape. Nobody likes this. Don't care. It's a great example because it's so gut-wrenchingly extreme. People have a very strong aversion to it. And I think that that's intentional. I think that's a reflection of the reality of the world. But we're going to do it anyway. So, X is not moral. Right? So, just to keep it so I don't have to erase everything, let's just keep the sides. So I believe negative x. So I believe, oops, maybe this is a bad way to do this. Let's just start this over. So x is nothing. Let's just say this. Negative. So x is just, is it moral? Rape is x. I believe not moral. This guy believes is moral. Right? So you, not literally you obviously, but person on the right believes rape is moral. Person on the left believes rape is not moral. Moral could mean nothing. Moral could be totally subjective. But at that point, what you're basically arguing is you're arguing a distinction without a difference. You would basically be saying there's no such thing as morality. So this whole thing goes away. And then the inevitable conclusion is that rape is just rape. Or you'd have to just say like rape is just an event. Or like there is no rape. It's just something that happens. It just unfolds in the universe. Which is logically, it is a logical possibility. Right? It is a possibility that it literally just is. It just happens. It's not moral. It's not immoral. It's not even whatever the definition of the thing is. It's just a thing that happens. The problem is that we have this instantaneous aversion because we recognize what the concept is, we recognize what the concept represents, and it creates an aversion, like this negative rise in us where we feel objectified, we feel violated. That doesn't make it immoral, but it should be a good experiential evidence that you should take seriously as evidence that it's true. So for example, any 50,000 beliefs in this doesn't say whether or not this is legitimate. It has no bearing on it. 50,000 beliefs in this doesn't say whether this is legit or not. It has no bearing. And likewise, this and this have no difference, because if you just made this number 10, or you just made this number 10, it changes nothing. It doesn't say anything about this claim. The number of people who believe or think a certain thing has no bearing on the claim itself. Morality is a great example, because now what you have to say is, okay, so in a world, right, in a world where this is true, this little underlined thing right here, where this concept is true, can I justify this position? Right? Let's flip them actually. So let's say that the person that believes or affirms this takes this position, says that it's not moral. This is what you do. You go back, you take your thing and you say, this thing that happens in life, rape, the violation of somebody against their will, sexual violation of somebody against their will, you say, okay, what's a person? You say, well, I believe that a person has intrinsic value. I'm not really sure how it comes up, but a person is a person, and that to me has intrinsic value. You haven't really justified it, but that's okay. I'm actually fine. I think that that's a good place to start. And you go back and you say, what makes a person? And you say, oh, well, it's the offspring of other people, and it participates in a social structure. And you say, okay, well, where does the social structure come from? Where do the rest of people come from? And you say, well, social structures are just things that evolved as part of the species in order to make the species function and let's call it flourish. You say, okay, well, where did that species come from? And you say, oh, well, it came from primates who have really similar tendencies to human beings, and they demonstrate a lot of the same characteristics, and they have societies and things like that. And you say, okay, great, where did primates come from? And then you say, oh, they came from fish, and you go back and back and back, and you say, they were all bacteria. It was an inevitability. Humans were always going to exist. Primates were always going to exist. The line between the two was always going to exist at some point. We're always going to diverge. So, inherently, us, primates, fish, bacteria, the only The only true justifiable rooting that you could claim is that because we are now different, we hold different value. Listen, if you think that's a good argument, that's up to you. I don't care. It's fine. It's not my position. I don't believe that I think that's a really non-compelling argument. I don't think that really supports any sense of true morality. I think morality is completely and utterly arbitrary. Society just evolved, and I'm not going to use the word unguided or random. I don't think that if evolution is true, it has to implicitly be utterly random. But you would basically just have to say that whatever helped stuff survive, no matter what it was, it always persisted because that's what it needed to do. And so your appeal is not necessarily to purely random at that stage, right? So we haven't purely appealed to randomness at that stage yet. We're not there yet. Your appeal at that point is it was a necessary thing to perpetuate, which still has value. I'm not even trying to dismiss that. I think it does have some level of value. It's still not a completely garbage argument. But it's still not really objective. It's like saying it is what it is, which, again, as I've said in other videos, that's not a good argument. Now, that doesn't make it untrue. It could be the way that the world unraveled, but it's a pretty uncompelling and pretty bunk argument. Then you go back even further and you say there's an infinite number of universes where this position about this claim is true. Where this, and this objectively lead to this conclusion because of the nature of the infinite number of universes. And then everything becomes arbitrary. If these two positions, right, if this position and this position, if your appeal undermines the fact that there seems to be this juxtaposition, these things both can't logically be true at the same time if this premise is true. If morality exists, both of these two things cannot simultaneously be true about this conclusion. It's not possible, unless this is not a moral word. So if rape isn't a moral word, and it has no moral baggage, then this premise doesn't apply to it. But we all inherently know that it does apply to that word. It does if morality exists. This is explicitly, it's one of the best examples because it's so extreme of moral reality. So again, when your appeal is you keep going back and you keep going back and you say, okay, what's my foundational premise that leads up to where I land? You would basically have to say there's an infinite number of universes where rape is acceptable. In fact, rape is moral. Like, let's say, for example, because it does help perpetuate the species. Let's just say, for example, there's a group of human beings and the women don't want any part of men and the species is going to die. Then it's necessary for the men to take it to overwrite the will of the women in order to perpetuate the species, because that's the whole purpose of their species existing. It's literally, as far as the universe is considered, perpetuating your species is the purpose. It's the moral thing to do. You have to violate their will in order to perpetuate your species. Now, I would never affirm that. I think that's an atrocious position to take, given what we know about the universe. I'm just saying that in an infinite number of universes, human society hit that point, and that was the condition that they were in, and that's the justification. And this is completely arbitrary. I'm just making stuff up. I'm just trying to say that when you start with that premise and you assume that all variations that could be conceived and are possible are inevitable, that there's an infinite number of variations, then that variation I just brought up does exist in an infinite number of iterations. And you can put the discriminatory mechanism onto the thing that generates all those possibilities, but it's arbitrary. You're just forcing it. There's no logical reason that has to be placed upon it. You're just trying to put toothpicks, under the bridge you're trying to build. And you don't have any justification for using the toothpicks. So everything collapses. It's just really weak. It's a really weak argument. And I know that it's seems trivial. But let's just, oops, I'm sorry. Let's not do that part. But let's just assume something different for a change. Let's assume this isn't true. Let's assume only this is true, which would be like the Christian perspective, for example. There is only one universe. Oops. The creator is Christian God. I'm going to specifically state this just so that we can reduce the amount of variation that could be defined. This doesn't have to be true. Let's just say for this example that this is true, right? Here's the claim. This is a premise. You accept the premise. You say morality exists. This claim is posited. This person believes that it's not moral. What's the justification? You go and you say, this universe exists. This is the truth of the cause of the universe. And then you go and you say, what is rape? It's the violation, the sexual violation against somebody's will of against them. And you say, okay, well, what's a person? And you say a person is created in the image of God. It's an image bearer of God, and they have intrinsic value, and you have to treat them with respect. Why do you have to treat them with respect? What is important about the image bearer of God? And you say, God is the ultimate standard. A violation against one of his creations that's an image bearer of him, according to his definition of character, says that it's an infringement upon him, and he's the standard. Now, you don't have to like that. It doesn't mean that you have to believe that that's true. I'm not trying to say that it's true. I'm trying to say that when you work backwards, you have a grounded root, a justification for your claim that applies to reality. And then you go forward and you say, does that match reality? That's a different argument. I think that it does. I think that there's a lot of positive evidence that seems to show that there's an intelligence, there's a mind, there's morality, there's all of these different components that do make reality make sense, but you can go in both directions and justify things with okay. So ultimately God's judgment is arbitrary relative to humans, right? Like it's arbitrary to us because we don't get a say in it. But it's not arbitrary in the sense that there's nothing it's rooted in. So when I use the word arbitrary, I don't mean that human beings inherently get a say in it, because that's kind of how arbitrary kind of gets thrown around. What I'm saying is that if a God says that it's true, that's your root. That's not arbitrary. It's arbitrary relative to us because we don't get to pick it. So in that sense, it's arbitrary. But ultimately, if he says that it's true, then it's not arbitrary. There's a reason that it's true, and he gets to say what is or isn't true as the cause and the creator of the universe. Whereas otherwise, it's arbitrary in the sense that you would basically just have to say it is what it is in this one, and it's not what it is in another one. So I think that kind of encapsulates everything I wanted to touch on. I think that there's, in a universe, right? So going back into a place where somebody affirms this premise, right? If this is true, so let's say morality is objective, this is the thing that happens in reality, this is truly a true statement. What I'm trying to say is that the only way you could know this conclusion is material/natural revelation, which I think is interesting. And of course, this is my assertion. I'm not saying I think that I just made a good argument for why that would be true, but that doesn't mean that it is true. I'm not trying to claim that I know what is true. I'm trying to present you with an argument for why I think what I'm saying. So to me, natural or material revelation is a great term for knowing this truth about this occurrence without access to rationality, because you're determined. Let me know what you think. Tear it apart. Don't tear it apart. Agree with me. Whatever. But that would be my argument. Long-winded. You're welcome. Have a good one, guys. We'll see you in the next one. Not sure what we're going to talk about next. Probably something close to this, though. See you.